All right, hello and how you doing? And welcome back to Two Jagoffs. I'm your host, Austin Cairns. And ladies and gentlemen, here on the podcast today, I am joined by a very special guest. He is a Pittsburgh legend, none other than Bill Hillgrove. Bill, how's it going this morning?
Oh, it's going very well, Austin, and yourself.
I am doing amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy day to join me here on Two Jagoffs today. I kind of wanted to just talk about your career a little bit, kind of go through from the beginning all the ways up to where you are now. I'm looking here that you went to Central Catholic High School, you went to Duquesne University as well, and then you ended up calling both Steelers, Pitt football, and Pitt basketball. Where did this all begin for you? Where did your love for sports and sports broadcasting begin?
It started in my bedroom in my home in Garfield. My dad knew I was kind of interested, and I fell into it by accident. I had an aunt who was the sister of charity, and she said, Sister Rosalie has this Pittsburgh Diocesan radio TV school. You ought to go there. And, my dad was an electrician, so I went to this school prepared to learn how to fix radios and TVs. Well, the nun handed me a script and said, read it. I read it. She said, perfect. Just what I'm looking for. A 12-year-old brat. And of course, I said, well, I don't need a script for that. That comes by me naturally. And I started doing this weekly live on the radio drama of this kid who was part of this family, who was the brat. And I got an early taste that, I had talent for this side of the microphone. And I was able to combine that with my love of sports. And my dad put up a little wireless mic in the bedroom that was connected to the radio. And instead of being outside in the backyard with my buddies, I'd describe what they were doing, pretending that I was doing play-by-play. So at a very young age, I kind of had an idea as to what I wanted to do.
So when you began doing that in your bedroom, that's actually like very similar to what I've been doing with my career. I like to be at home, I mute the TV, and I kind of just pretend like I'm the one that's calling the game. What was that transition like, though, from going from the radio to actual play-by-play once you got into the industry?
Well, the only way you learn to do play-by-play is to do it. And so if you do it in your backyard, or if you do it, for a minor league team, or if you do it for a high school or even a junior high, you're doing it. And that's the only way to learn. There's no book that tells you how to be a play-by-play person, nor if there was one, would it help you. And so, I was able to do it. And when I finished up at Central Catholic and went to Duquesne University, they had an on-air station, and the students operated it. And so I got to do disc jockey, opera host, news, just a myriad of things, and it really helped me cut my teeth. And then I was a disc jockey at TAE Radio in 1967, and I did a night show from 8 to midnight, heavy on sports scores. I did updates on scores every 15 minutes, and so people knew I had a love for sports. Well, the boss came to me in 69 and said, early 69, and he said, have you done play-by-play? I said, yeah, I did a little bit of high school football when I was a student at Duquesne, and I did a lot of college basketball. He said, perfect. We're getting the games on our station. Ed Conway's going to do the football, but he can't travel that often because of his television duties. So you'll do the basketball, and you'll help Ed in the booth with football. And that's the way it came down, and I got to put my sports hat on.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So whenever you put that sports hat on, like I want to put myself in your shoes for a second. You're walking into a live game day situation, whether it's Steelers, Pitt football, Pitt basketball. What exactly is your routine like the day of the game, like right before you go on air?
I was very fortunate when I worked at TAE for the summer of 59. I was like a part-time station wagon driver, tour guide, and switchboard operator. I got to know Ray Scott, who was on the staff at Channel 4. And Ray was one of the best, not only local sportscasters, but network sportscasters I'd ever been around. He was always my idol. He told me something that I never forgot. He said, Billy, 95% of your work is done before you step into that booth. The other 5% is executing and having fun. And, it's almost like athletes, your performance probably is going to be a reflection of your practice. And, so that was good advice, and I followed that advice. And so when I step into the booth or step in front of the microphone on game day, uh, John Majors put it best, the hay's in the barn. He always said that on Thursdays, the hay's in the barn. And, then you can relax and just do your job. Now, on game day for basketball, I've got to make sure that everybody's playing. I have to tape Coach Capel about an hour before airtime. And we do that at home. And then on the road, I try to do his pregame show at the shoot around the day of the game. In football, I'd like to get there 3 hours ahead. In basketball, 2 hours. 3 hours in football just to make sure that I've got all the people I need on the chart. And I try to watch the pregame to see if there's new numbers or mystery people that are coming out of the woodwork. And also for, the pro football, an hour and a half before the game, they announce the scratches. So, you get that all done, but you still have to relax because if you go into a game day behind in your preparation, it's almost like cramming for a final.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. You got to put the work in. The work does itself. It doesn't do itself. You have to do it. So, that's my philosophy, and it's been a thing that's worked for me.
Now, whenever we're looking at your career overall, I mean, you've called lots of legendary games. You've had lots of memorable moments. I mean, you're on air with Myron Cope at one point, Greg Wolfley. Was there a particular moment that stood out to you? And this can go across all three different sports that you called. Was there a specific moment or game or moment that stood out to you in your career so far?
Well, I'll start with the Steelers and obviously Santonio Holmes touchdown. Uh, I'm at the right end of Raymond James Stadium doing most of the game to my left. And he's not only to my left, but he's to my far left. And I couldn't even see Santonio, let alone where his feet were. But Ed Conway, who was my mentor at Channel 4, and a guy that gave me great advice, he said, watch the official. And I could see the official on the sideline in the end zone about maybe 10 feet away from where Santonio caught the ball. And when his hands came up to his waist, I knew they were going all the way up, and I called touchdown. I didn't see it, but I trusted my instincts and I trusted that official. And I think that was probably my crowning moment as a Steelers announcer. For Pitt, my favorite is when Tony Dorsett broke Archie Griffin's record. It happened at Navy. The whole brigade doffed their caps. His parents came out of the stands and walked around. It was pretty special.
That's awesome. And bit of a funny story off topic with that. I'm actually personally an Arizona Cardinals fan, so I remember that exact broadcast when you called the Santonio Holmes catch. And as much as I love your expertise, it kind of broke my heart seeing that he did get both feet in bounds. I thought that was funny. I just wanted to add that on.
Yeah, well, and Larry Fitzgerald, scored the go-ahead touchdown, ran right by Troy Polamalu. And I'm glad that Larry's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. He certainly deserves it.
Oh, absolutely. Larry Fitzgerald most certainly will be there one day. You were talking about some people that helped you early on within your career. Who were some other mentors that helped you get into this industry?
Oh gosh, where do I start? Beano Cook. When I was a student at Duquesne, we played our home games at the field house, and so I had to deal with Beano. And Beano, I knew early on, just had a great sense of humor and loved to barb people. And I'd, call his office, and he'd pick the phone up. Oh, it's you Catholics bothering me again. And he's just giving you the needle. And I learned to appreciate his great humor. Bino certainly helped. Dean Billick, I think he's the guy who originally said to his management at Pitt, I think we ought to take a chance on this guy. He's a pretty good young up and coming play-by-play guy. So I'll always be grateful to him. I'll always be grateful to John Conomikes, who oversaw Channel 4 during his local career, but he's still, very important to the Hearst Corporation, still goes to their monthly meetings, and, he's been a mentor. And, I can't honestly say anybody else, but, those were the main. Ray Scott, Ed Conway, Bino, and Dean Billick.
Those are some great mentors. Before I transition over into like a little sports talk, I want to ask you one last question regarding your career. As someone who is a sports, like an aspiring sports broadcaster, I go to Point Park University. There's many students there that's probably listening to this episode right now that would like to get some great advice from you. What exactly would you say to them when entering this industry?
Be versatile. You don't know at your age what you really want to do. Now, I had an inkling, but I still had to do other things. I had to do news, I had to do disc jockey work, and I didn't know that it would lead to this career, but it finally did. But I think if you're versatile, the gentle winds will push you in the direction that you should follow. The other thing is, and I learned this from the great humorist, oh gosh, I'll think of him, an Irish humorist who said, "Be yourself. Everybody else is taken. Be yourself. Don't try to be the
Mm.
next Don Costas, or don't try to be the next Mike Tirico or Al Michaels. You can learn from those guys, and those guys have a lot of things that they do right that you can learn from, but you still have to be yourself."
That's great advice. That's really great advice. I really appreciate that. Let's talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers for a second. So this past season, Pittsburgh Steelers, of course, made the playoffs. They were one and done once more. You've covered the Steelers for a very long time throughout your career. I want to get your opinion on this current Pittsburgh Steelers team that we're seeing. What is your expectations for next year? What was your, I guess, your overall opinion on this past year?
Well, I'll ask you a question. Who's going to play
Of course.
quarterback? You know, that'll tell you a lot, because look at the championship weekend. The four best quarterbacks were left, if you don't include Joe Burrow. But and you got to have the guy that pulls the trigger. And so, who pulls the trigger is going to determine a lot of their success. I'm not sure that they may end up going with Russell Wilson again. A lot of people think he's gone if they're looking outside. Well, maybe they are, but you know, uh, that's the important thing. Who pulls the trigger? And unfortunately, we were spoiled by Ben Roethlisberger, a Hall of Famer for sure. And following an act like that is not easy, and that's what the Steelers are in right now.
Absolutely. I mean, being able to get both Russell Wilson and Justin Fields for as little as they did last year, it's a great price. It's a great bargain for the time being, but long term, that's not exactly the solution. There's a lot of rumors right now about different quarterbacks to be coming here, possibly a Trevor Lawrence, a Kyler Murray, Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers. Is there a quarterback that you specifically have your eyes on, or do you believe we should run it back with the same two?
Well, let's start with Trevor Lawrence. What's the price? Who do you have to give them? T.J. Watt? I mean, that's what I don't. That's the X factor. I don't know. I wish I followed it more closely, which I didn't have to this year.
Of course.
But I kind of see it from the outside that they need some changes, and they're making defensive changes in the coaching staff, and there may be a couple of more to follow. I think offensively, they're pretty much content that they were headed in the right direction. Hey, look, Russell Wilson gave them what he had. And I said to this to people earlier in the season when Justin Fields was starting. I said, as soon as Wilson is healthy, he's going to be your starter because he wears that C. And anybody with a C on their jersey, there's a reason for it. And it was his experience. And, he gave them some triple-digit outings in terms of the quarterback proficiency rating. And we haven't seen that since Ben. So, how much gas is left in that tank? And no, that's not the long-term answer. But, everything in the NFL right now is short-term. Can you get to the Super Bowl? Is your window still open? I'm not sure about that.
You mentioned Super Bowl. I want to get your quick thoughts and opinions on this. The Philadelphia Eagles had a massive win last week against the Kansas City Chiefs. Did you expect that big of a loss, or were you expecting Kansas City to keep it close?
I rooted for the Eagles, even though, I should root for the AFC, but I rooted for the Eagles because, they're in state. And, I go back to this, Austin. One year we pulled into the parking lot for a Pittsburgh Eagles game, and I saw an Eagles fan on one side of a cooler and a Steelers fan on the other side of the cooler carrying it toward the stadium. And I said to J.D. Fogarty, our spotter, rest his soul, I said, JD, you'll never see that in Cleveland or Baltimore. You'll never see a Steeler fan carrying a cooler with either a Browns fan or a Ravens fan. But, so it was easy to root for Philly, but I didn't see that coming. Now that I saw it, I think I know what happened. The defense just seized the day, and they did it without blitzing. They put all kind of heat on Mahomes, and they did it with 4 or 5 rushers. And gosh, that was impressive.
That was very impressive. I read a stat that I thought was pretty crazy. Only 6 teams in Super Bowl history never blitzed a single snap. All 6 of those teams went on to win the Super Bowl. One of them was Philly this past Sunday. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the year, your 4 best teams are left. Your 4 healthiest teams, generally speaking, are left. And good teams make you pay for blitzing.
Yes, they
And I
do.
noticed that Kansas City early in the game, they sent a lot of people at Jalen, and I tell you what, they paid the price because somebody was open down the field, wide open. And so, yeah, I think the ideal is not to have to blitz. But how many teams are good enough up front not to have to blitz? Not many. The Eagles being one of the few exceptions.
Of course, of course. I want to transition over to Pitt basketball real quick now. This is something you've been covering as well. As of right now, the team is 14-10. They're 5-8 in ACC conference. This was a team that, in my eyes, looked so good on paper, and honestly, I believe they could put up some good amount of points throughout the season. But they've had lots of heartbreaking losses. I mean, you talk about the SMU loss, the UNC. What's Wake Forest? What's your thoughts and opinions on this Pitt basketball team, and do you believe they can make a push for March?
I, I, I'm an optimist. I always think that door is open. And so, yeah, can they turn this year around? Yes. And you look at the schedule, they can. Now, can they get to the big dance? They'd probably have to win a couple of games in the tournament, if not the tournament itself. But I think the difference between this team this year and the team last year, which I thought at the end of the season they were playing as well as anybody in the country, I think it's a leadership thing. There's no Blake Hinson there. There's no Jamarius Burton. Guys who would say, look, you have to give us more. They would say that to their teammates. The leadership comes from on the court. And I don't think you see that this year. And I think as a result, the chemistry's kind of been soft and fuzzy. And, let's hope that they can turn it around. But you wonder.
What's your thoughts
And
on? Oh God, I
no,
apologize.
I was going to say one more thing. And Jalen Lowe probably not available against Miami on Saturday because he's in concussion protocol. Well, you lose your best player. That doesn't augur well because it comes down to freshman Biba Cummings, and sometimes freshmen just don't get the whole picture.
Absolutely, yeah. That's actually what I was looking at the schedule here. I see Miami, Syracuse, Notre Dame, a bunch of ACC level teams. Would you say these are must-win games for them going into this weekend, or do you believe they still have time?
No, I don't like must win. I like winnable games. These are all winnable games in front of them, except maybe the visit to Louisville. Louisville, obviously the surprise team of the year. Uh, and I see why. I mean, they have players who've got experience. And I think, that's the key. You've got to have people who've been there and done it. You can't do it with freshmen anymore because of the transfer portal. Teams can instantly grab experienced players. So let's see what happens and hope for the best.
Awesome. One last question regarding Pitt basketball, then we'll transition over to Pitt football. Jeff Capel, he's been the head coach for a minute here in Pittsburgh. Do you believe he's the guy of the future, or do you believe Pitt maybe should look in a different direction down the line?
He absolutely is the guy of the future. He's had some bad luck. It starts to turn good now, and the arrow, I think, is pointing up. And let's face it, coaches don't win games, players do. And anybody who thinks coaches win games is misguided. And I think he's the right guy for the job. He just needs a little bit better luck and maybe a leader or two on the court that he hasn't had this year.
Absolutely. I want to present 100% agree. I mean, watching Pitt basketball for the longest time was pretty painful. Once Capel came in, I mean, you could see a new light with this team. So I'm 100% in agreement with you there. I want to talk about Pitt football to end things off today. So Pitt football last year started off 7-0, first time since Marino was in college. Then they ended off the season with a 6-game losing streak. What happened there?
Well, the injury to Eli Holstein in the Syracuse game, which was their last win, October 24th, and he wasn't available for much of the rest of the year. And I think injury was a factor. They went to Boston College without Desmond Reed. That's going to a gunfight with a knife. And, I think that was the injuries were part of it, but, also confidence. And the confidence wasn't there. And for whatever reason, that has to change. I think Holstein getting healthy and starting the year and continuing is going to help. I think the offense is in pretty good shape. I think they got to get some help on defense, especially up front. Now, that having been said, up front offensively, they've got to have help. There are no Russ Grimms and Jim Sweeneys and, those kind of players, Bill Frelick's running around on that offensive line. And they've got to get some studs up there to make sure that, Eli can operate an efficient offense.
So Pitt football, I mean, ever since Kenny Pickett was in college, we kind of transitioned between a couple different quarterbacks. We saw Nate Yarnell start some games. We saw Phil Dracovic last year. Of course, Eli Holstein was the star of the show this year until his injury. Do you see Holstein being the guy we could probably develop within Pitt's football system? Or do you think they're going to be looking at the transfer portal over the next 2 years?
No, he's the answer. There's a reason that Nick Saban was in his living room.
Yep.
He's got talent and he's got ability. He's a leader. It's just that, to play hurt is a tough thing, especially at that level. And it's tough to be 100% if you're not feeling that well. And so, I think if he can stay healthy and that O-line can keep him healthy, I think they can score a lot of points.
All comes down to O-line. Pat Narduzzi, he's under a pretty big contract right now. A lot of people, but he's been pretty under fire in the Pittsburgh media as of late. I want to get your thoughts on Narduzzi. I'm personally a big Narduzzi fan. I believe he's done great things for Pitt. He brought us an ACC championship a couple years back. What's your thoughts on him?
I've always said, if you want to replace a coach, you better find a better one. And I don't think there are too many better ones around than Pat Narduzzi. Now, sure, he's got his critics. All coaches do. But, what he's done and he's given that program stability, something that it didn't have for a long time. Who was the center? Anyhow, there was a kid that graduated about 6 years ago who played for 5 different head coaches. Now it's stable, and I think you can build on that, and I think this program has.
That's awesome. I want to transition over to this last topic for today's episode. So usually here on Two Jagoffs, we do something where we call it a game show. We do a game show every Sunday where we kind of just have some fun. We don't really talk about sports. We just kind of go into our own personal lives a little bit. And I want to get to know Bill Hillgrove to end things off today. And of course, this podcast is called Two Jagoffs. The second Jagoff is not here today, but he wanted me to ask you a question. So this is on behalf of my dad, who could not make it today. What is your favorite restaurant here in Pittsburgh? I mean, you've probably traveled all around the city. You've probably had some good meals while calling some games. Is there a restaurant that is your go-to?
It's very little known because it's tiny, but it's in Murraysville, and it's operated by a very nice family. It's called Bonchibo, and it's Claudio and Angela, the mother and dad. Their kids are cooks and waiters and waitresses, and it's really special in Murraysville. Probably the best Italian food that you're ever going to taste.
Oh, do you have like a go-to on menu item on there? Is there a go-to?
Oh, absolutely. The penne pasta with vodka sauce.
That sounds good. I'm not gonna lie, that sounds really good. I'm definitely gonna have to go give that one a try later on. Staying on the food topic, the other Jagoff, Lucas, could not make it either. What is your, I guess, pre-game snack? Do you happen to because you're on the road a lot, you're traveling, you're doing stuff here in Pittsburgh. Is there a go-to snack that you have right before you go on there?
I don't like to eat right before I go on the air. I'm not hungry. I know, there are some programs left that still have a media meal. Others, most of them have gone to, you get a voucher to go to the public restaurant there. And that's not my cup of tea. So, you know what I do? I depend on the snack that they give us after we leave the shoot around. And it's generally a sandwich. And then I have nothing until the post-game meal. So, that's kind of the thing I get into at home. It's basically the same thing. They give us the chit to go to the restaurant in the Pete. And I'm not comfortable eating before a game. And I'd rather talk than burp my way through the broadcast.
I could, well, I 100% agree with you on that one. I actually just called a basketball game yesterday. It was Carlo and Penn State Altoona, and they offered me pizza right beforehand. I was like, nah, let me just wait till after the game. I don't want to be choking on pepperoni throughout the game. So I 100% agree with
Right.
you on that. Well, Bill, it was an honor absolutely talking to you today. Was there any final words or anything that you wanted to end off with? Possibly anything you wanted to shout out before we end off today's episode?
I'll say it again. Be yourself and be versatile. That's my advice. Austin, it's been a pure delight. Thank you for the questions.
Absolutely. Thank you again so much, Bill Hillgrove. And thank you to everybody who tuned into today's episode of Two Jagoffs. There'll be a new episode on Thursday with Lucas and my dad returning. And until next time, we'll see you in the next one. Peace.